Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming back to another episode of the Your Gray Matters podcast. My name is Jason, here as always with my dad, your host, Neil. Hey, Dad, how you doing today?
I am fantastic. Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
And say, Dad, can you tell me when the best time to buy gas for your car is?
It's amazing that you should ask that. In fact, on this podcast, we're going to tell you. It's very interesting.
So this podcast is pretty interesting. We have the Honorable Dan McTeague, who is a former member of Parliament, and today runs an I guess would you call it a lobbyist group or a uh, what would you call it? It's an organization for affordable energy. I don't know if he considers himself a lobbyist.
No, I don't know that he's a lobbyist, but he's been involved in affordable energy, and he's probably one of the best known people to speak about energy and fuel and where we are in this country with it.
And it's fitting that we have a former MP on today. If you're watching this episode as it comes out, it is election day today, Monday, April 28th here in Canada. So if you haven't voted yet, do it after this episode. Finish the episode and then go vote. Uh, but as we talk about politics, I wanted to introduce a website that I'm very proud of that I've been working on for a long time now. It's called policyshift.ca, and it's just in time for the election. Policyshift.ca allows you to look at where the party leaders land on various issues. So if you're interested in trade, if you're interested in diplomacy, if you're interested in LGBTQ plus rights, you can go to policyshift.ca and you can click on one of the party leaders' names. We have Mark Carney, we have Pierre Poilievre, we have Jagmeet Singh, and we have Yves-François Blanchet, and we'll be adding more politicians as time goes on. And once you've selected your politician, you can start selecting issues, and it's going to give you a timeline of where that party leader stood on that issue and if it changed. And you want to know what the best part is, Dad?
Yeah, I do.
There's no editorializing. This isn't my opinion on what the policy is. This isn't my opinion on if the policy stance has changed. This is directly from their own words. So if Mark Carney says, I'm going to kill the carbon tax, we'll see, but that's in his words, not mine, not yours, not any editors. It's all directly from their own mouth.
Well, this is a welcome change from what we see right now, where people seem to think that they have to create the news, not just report it. Congratulations on your website. I've started looking at it too. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason is multi talented and very knowledgeable. Have a look at his website. Have a look. But first, watch this podcast.
And as you watch the podcast, pay attention to some of the issues that Dan brings up. And, undoubtedly those issues are on policyshift.ca. But for now, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you're listening to this, remember we are on YouTube in case you like to watch. And other than that, let's hand it over to Dan McTeague.
And please subscribe.
Welcome to Your Gray Matters, the podcast that unveils the miracles already amongst us. Here, we believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. Tune in to discover the fascinating people with extraordinary stories, innovative products, and groundbreaking services. With your host, Neil Silvert, who's earned his gray hair and still has use of his gray matter.
Hi, everybody. I'm Neil from the Your Gray Matters podcast. We're glad that you're back with us. We truly believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. People will always find the way. And today we're really honored because we have one of the great leaders in our country and our community. We're all lucky to have him. You've probably heard him on TV or on the radio. And if you haven't, well, you can start today. And we are really excited to have Dan McTeague, the Honorable Dan McTeague, member of the Privy Council. Dan, welcome to the Your Gray Matters podcast.
Very kind introduction. I don't often use the titles, kind of not like me, but that might be owing to my Irish background. But nevertheless, thank you for that. And look, good to be here with you today, Neil.
Thanks very much. Hey, everybody, let me tell you about this very distinguished man, the Honorable Dan McTeague, PC, which is Privy Council, not the other one that you're all thinking of, but we're going to come back to that. And he is a former Canadian member of Parliament, an MP, and a prominent energy analyst. And he's known for his consumer advocacy work. He's a young guy. He was born in 1962 in the great city of Winnipeg, Manitoba, probably my most favorite city in the country. And McTeague is fluently bilingual. I'm going to assume French and English, but you never know. And he holds a degree from the University of Toronto. Before his political career, he did work in public relations for Toyota Canada. He's married to Dr. Daniela Rossi, a great dentist, and they have 5 kids. Now, Dan was a member of Parliament from 1993 to 2011. That's 18 years of service to our country, folks. And he represented various Ontario ridings, Pickering, Scarborough East, and places in between. During his tenure, he held roles, listen to this, everybody, such as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, focusing on the protection of Canadians abroad. He also served as a vice chair of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science, and Technology. And notably, Dan was instrumental in legislative efforts such as the recognition of the third week in April as annual Donor Organ Week, and the amendment of the criminal code to make fleeing a peace officer using a vehicle unlawful. He has an extensive and successful political career. After leaving politics, Dan McTeague became widely recognized as Canada's gas guru, and that might be where you've heard his name and his great speaking voice. And with his expertise in energy pricing, that's where he got the recognition. He founded Tomorrow's Gas Price Today, and we're going to talk about gas pricing today, everyone. It's a platform aimed at helping consumers anticipate fuel prices. I don't know how in heck you anticipate nowadays. He also served as a senior petroleum analyst at Gas Buddy, and currently leads, and I like this website, you should look at it, Canadians for Affordable Energy, and we'll give you that website at the end of this. And that's an organization advocating for accessible energy solutions. We'll find out what that actually means today. Dan has been a vocal critic of certain climate policies, unusual for a Liberal, expressing skepticism about the urgency of climate change narratives and opposing measures like the carbon tax. He has described some climate activism as alarmist and has challenged policies he believes may negatively impact energy affordability. Dan, we're so excited to have you on today again. Welcome to the Your Grey Matters podcast.
You know, what a wonderful introduction, and I thank you for that. Very extensive. Didn't realize I did all those things, but now that you remind me.
Well, I had a great talk with your wife last night. No, not really. Great, and thanks for coming. So, Dan, listen, we both have brides in the dental industry. Dan, I have to ask something because a lot of people already have been asking me today because I've been bragging about you coming on. So how come here in Hamilton, when I went to bed last night, it was about $1.19 a liter? Woke up this morning, it was about $1.33. My buddy in London called me this morning and said, well, it's $1.11 here. Dan, what the hell is going on with gas pricing, and how do we predict it and understand it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I call it gas bar shenanigans. And the message here is simply never buy your gasoline before 6 p.m. in the evening. Don't buy it in the morning. Don't buy it in the noon time. Do not buy it early afternoon, even later afternoon. Wait till 6 p.m. and you'll save yourself anywhere from 10 to 15 cents a liter. That's because gas stations take the average. They make about 8 or 9 cents a liter. We call that a retail margin. That's over and above what it costs them to actually buy the fuel. And once they've hit a certain point, including, of course, money they may make with you going to the store and buying, in Ontario, wine or beer or whatever they have, I don't know, beef jerky or potato chips or coffee. Once they put that all together, if they're not losing any money by the end of the day, they're willing to give away that retail margin of 7, 8, or 9 cents a liter.
Wow.
In some cases, they go even below that. So that's kind of what you have, a big advantage. If they want to give away their gasoline below what it costs them to buy it, then take advantage of it and never, ever, ever, ever buy before 6 p.m. And that'll save you a lot of money, more than I can do in terms of prediction these days.
Well, that's perfect. Thanks for coming on the Your Great. No, I'm just kidding. And you know what? It's really, really important what you said, because that also suggests that the owners of the bars, are they the owners or are they renters? I don't even know. But the people who are in that business, they do have a say in a way of how much they want to sell the gas for, especially after 6 o'clock, which perhaps takes away some of the arguments of monopoly, oligopoly, or am I just naive? I'm not sure.
Well, in 1998, a young member of Parliament wrote this. It's called the Liberal, or the report of the Liberal Committee on Gasoline Pricing in Canada, June 1998. And in that, I'd spent some time learning about gas stations, how they operate. Nothing's really changed. I mean, the players have changed, and some of the names have changed. But since then, it's pretty much the same thing. The wholesale price of gasoline is determined on U.S. markets, usually on a day like today, where they might be up or down a penny or two. You multiply that by the value of the Canadian dollar and divide it by 3.78541, the number of liters in the US gallon, and the value of the Canadian dollar, which is, of course, really important because it fluctuates. Then you have, of course, the secret sauce, which is usually a formula in which gas stations or refiners add about 13 cents a liter. And some of that is the second carbon tax, which never got eliminated. It's about 5 or 6 cents a liter. So refiners make 8 cents a liter. That's the price you pay. That's the price that the gas station has to pay. They only have control over the last 8 cents or 9 cents a liter. And that's often what we see moving up and down in any given market, and differentiates station to station. The big difference, if you're a Costco and you can move massive volumes, you're going to get a better wholesale price than the little mom and pop standalone station.
Which is, depending on your point of view, maybe unfair to the gas mom and pop stations, but at the same time, people are cringing with the price of gas and everything else. So I guess you go where you go for gas.
You do?
And Dan, it's interesting because another question that I've heard people raise is this a scam? The price goes up when we go to summer gas, then we go to winter gas, and the price goes up again. Is that real? Is there really a reason for price increases when we change the seasons?
Well, it is very much a real factor. And the factor is simply this. In the summer, gasoline becomes very volatile with higher temperatures. And it's not just bad for your fuel consumption and your the way in which your vehicle uses fuel. It's also environmentally damaging because it evaporates into the atmosphere, and you get all sorts of VOCs, volatile organic compounds. So what happens is that twice a year we have a shift, winter to summer, summer to winter, and it goes the summer gasoline from April 15 until September 15, and from September 16th or September 15th until April 15th, you have the winter gasoline. The big difference is there's a lot of reasons, not just the formulation, how they make it, but also the components. In the winter, you're using cheap to make and cheap to mix butane. Stuff you use for little Bic lighters, that type of thing. That's really good in winter because it ignites very quickly, no matter how cold it is. You want that, especially the further north you go, in which, of course, we are in northern climate. And during summer, we put alkylates. It's very expensive. And by the way, that is one of the main components in premium gasoline versus regular. So alkylation is extremely difficult or more complicated in terms of refining process. And it's how you bend the molecules. In the case of more alkylates, you're actually bringing what's called RVP. It's technical. I'm not a scientist, but that's been around, the tried and true, and it's no joke. And that's why, of course, I was able to predict to people the price change would be about 6 cents a liter. And sure enough, it was. By the way, it's not just Canada. The United States has the same standards depending where you are in the United States. And sometimes they go to the summer gasoline in places like Arizona for obvious reasons, Southern California a lot earlier than, say, Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes, or the West.
Well, thank you for that. It's good to know. I never did really understand. I think I'm naturally curious and sometimes try to wonder why things happen. So thank you with that. Now, everybody, now you know that to expect long lineups for gasoline purchases after 6 p.m. in your area. Thank you, Dan, for that. Dan, I have to ask you too, what is accessible energy? You're passionate about it. Your company is about it. Your website is awesome. And again, we'll be posting that. What is accessible energy and why does it turn you on so much?
Well, it's the basis on which our economy functions, and which our prosperity is based on, which you would not really have a functioning economy if it were not for energy, like gasoline, like diesel, like natural gas, like propane. Yes, they fall into the category of fossil fuels, but without them, we'd be dead in the water because there are no real alternatives. Although I can suggest that there might be a small one called nuclear, and I know something about that. There's a little coin I like to show people. It's from my old riding of Pickering, which was the first nuclear reactors in North America, built back in '65, long before climate stuff came around. But the idea is that without energy, its availability, its reliability, and its affordability are very much our standard of living, our quality of life would be greatly affected. Imagine not having gasoline or diesel. Your jets wouldn't run, your trains couldn't run, your buses couldn't run, your trucks couldn't run. And imagine not having propane or natural gas. How do you keep your home heated? And yes, you can have electricity, and some of that can be hydro. And by the way, we've been doing that for 120 years in Canada. Think of the Adam Beck facilities at Niagara Falls. But the topography of Ontario's or geography doesn't permit use of hydro dams at every turn. And, reliable new types of technology are there, but they're very embryonic. They can't produce the amount of energy on a sustainable, reliable basis. Like wind will work when there's wind, solar when there's sun, and anything in between that. All of those things do require a significant amount of hydrocarbons, like the ones I've just mentioned: oil, natural gas, propane, etc., in order to run. So without that, we're really talking about a big, a big decline in our standard of living. We'd all be living in the state of nature, eating acorns and wearing animal skins, were it not for these things that have allowed us as a society to progress and flourish.
That's a really interesting comment that you've made because it certainly flies in the face of a lot of people right now who think that not using these kinds of energies will have a major effect on saving us from climate change. And I don't get it because we have a country that's full of natural resources that people need. And as you just said, we need them. But if I could move on even more, you're not a big lover of the explanations of climate change. And I know that I've discussed this with you, the carbon tax. I've seen the carbon tax go down now that there's still a carbon tax. It's just not in effect right now. And I guess the next government will decide if it is, because for it to really be gone, it has to be legislated. Of course, we've not had a process of legislation. But you told me that the carbon tax, if it's reenacted, could go up as much as 40 cents a liter. I don't even care if it's 1 cent a liter. I don't see the point of it. Can you help me with this?
Well, from an economic point of view, it made no sense. It bludgeoned the wrong people. It slammed people on the head. I mean, for many years, I've been ringing the bell saying there's going to come a day where you're not going to be able to afford this. It's cool to be trendy and bought off by these rebates, which for most people winds up being far short of what they need and what they actually have to fork out. It's also highly inflationary. I worked with Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor, helped sponsor a project that he did in which he did two peer-reviewed studies and said, carbon taxes and net zero policies are in fact leading to higher food prices. It's not the only reason, but it has a substantial reason for it. We have to also consider the beyond the economics and the political, the scientific. I mean, if this worked, then and it was something that could change the weather to something a little bit more agreeable and stabilize the weather. There's no evidence of that. More importantly, the sheer numbers. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. The climate is an extremely complicated interaction in which it takes several disciplines to make sure that you have an understanding of how Canada's contribution of 1.5% of CO2, which is, frankly, the giver of life, a 0.04% of the atmosphere is somehow, kind of important in terms of determining how the weather is going to be. It'd be like saying, what we should be cautious of is a grain of dirt is found on the, I don't know, the Burlington Skyway. So we ripped the entire Skyway down because we found one grain of dirt. That's what we're talking about, the mathematical improbability and plausibility of what is being discussed. And while some suggest the science is settled, I say to some extent that science is corrupted by governments and organizations which are trying to promote a particular agenda, which has been extraordinarily difficult for Canadians and others to accommodate. While at the same time, putting us at an unusually uneven level playing field in which we are a nation of resource production and use, and to curb that for any given reason has significant economic impacts, the likes of which I think explain in large part why Canada is seeing a significant economic and I can say to some extent even a social decline as a result of our inability to make ends meet. So fooling around with this has consequences, and I'm not one of those who who apes scientists, or politicians aping scientists, or scientists trying to pretend they're politicians. At the end of the day, if I think we separate the grift and we separate the facts, I think we come very quickly to a realization that politicians need to, stay in their own lanes, and maybe more scientists ought to develop and adhere to something that I've always said. And I've had this discussion with my wife, who is a true scientist. Maybe the scientific method might be something they want to consider for the first time, as opposed to trying to pretend they're politicians.
Very interesting. And that leads me actually to your opinion on electric cars. Do you think that there's a place for them yet? Tell me what you think of them.
Well, look, as a kid growing up, everyone was a backyard mechanic. You learned a lot about these things, but the car isn't something that just developed overnight. It took generations for it to develop. The propulsion is also important. The internal combustion engine, which is, 140 years old in terms of its invention, Daimler-Benz, Henry Ford later on. But the idea behind electric vehicles is that they have been tried. They were tried in the 1920s and they failed. And they failed because they weren't practical. They weren't accessible in terms of the infrastructure that was necessary for them. I mean, the EVs have their place, maybe in cities, golf carts. You see these little bikes whizzing around in downtown Hamilton, downtown Toronto, big, large cities to do food deliveries. That makes sense. But to suggest that we should simply turn the economy upside down, get rid of the auto pack or change the auto pack, put billions of dollars of money we don't have borrowed in terms of subsidizing their buildings, subsidizing their infrastructure, subsidizing their sale, to incentivize people to buy these things, while at the same time they're colossally less reliable and far more unaffordable than the efficiencies of internal combustion engines. Neil, I work public relations for Toyota Canada, as you said at the outset. I mean, there's a company that said, yeah, we'll do our electric, but we're going to stick with hybrids, because we can take a vehicle that took 8 cylinders 20, 30 years ago and turn it into a 4-cylinder, even a 3-cylinder, with the same efficiency, same power, same speed, same luxury, same convenience, while at the same time having longevity of life. These things will last a lot longer. They won't be as harmful to the environment as the electric vehicles, and the reproduction of batteries and how you actually make batteries is extraordinarily damaging to the environment. 100% of the vehicle, internal combustion vehicle, is recycled, not 50%, not 60%. And the irony of ironies, no electric vehicle would survive without a significant component of hydrocarbons, whether it's your polymers, whether it's your plastics, whether it's your rubber, whether it's the steel, whether it's the paint. All of that comes from fossil fuels. So I think we got to be careful and not see EVs and EV mandates imposing on people, you shall drive these things, which can be very, very difficult for a country like Canada, which I mentioned earlier is a lot colder, and for which these vehicles are not quite as reliable.
And yet there is a government mandate to only have EVs by, I think, 2035. And I, like many government mandates, I flushed that one. So one last thing on energy, because I've wondered myself, and this is going to go a little bit into politics right now. So let's go there a little bit. First of all, Pierre Poilievre talks a lot about Bill C-69. I'm not leading us into a discussion of the parties. I'm leading us into the effect of these Bill 69 Canadians and the potential for us to have worldwide customers as opposed to our big and glorious friends in the US. Can you comment on Bill C, please?
Bill C-69 is another facet of what's called the net zero program. That gives you the EV mandates, it gives you the carbon taxes, that brings in the emissions caps, and it also brings in the no pipelines bill, which basically said we're not going to build anymore unless you include downstream carbon impacts. That is to say, if a pipeline's delivering oil and natural gas, you have to account for the fact that it's going to increase the amount of oil and natural gas, and by implication, release more CO2, which they treat as a pollutant. Another dishonest and fundamental, disinformation piece. CO2 is not a pollutant. It's, as I mentioned earlier, an essential component and the giver of life. Too much of it we can argue about, but the reality is that what C-69 and its complementary bill C-48 did was to ensure that even if you could get pipelines to coastal waters from where it is landlocked in Alberta or places like Saskatchewan or the Montney region in British Columbia, you'd never be able to get to open markets. So instead, we saw, of course, many LNG projects simply vanish. taken up by Americans. Investment left Canada. The Canadian dollar sunk in terms of value. You and I pay more for everything because we pay for everything in U.S. terms. And now the Americans are buying still our natural gas with pipelines that come from Alberta into the United States for, say, $3 a million cubic feet, and they sell it with 7 LNG projects to Europe and to Asia for about $15-16. So, I mean, unless we want sucker written on our forehead, because the only people who really followed this climate stuff have been Canadians. We've been the international Boy Scouts, but we look like the international thumb-sucking dolts when it comes down to it, because what we've done is harmed ourselves, while the rest of the world said, "You don't want to do it? We'll get someone else to do it." Canada is a resource-based economy. World global leaders come to Canada looking for energy. And if we think that we can sell them more widgets or more hydro or more hydrogen or whatever the case may be, we're kidding ourselves. They don't want to buy our cars. They don't want to buy our technology. They want to buy our resources. And if we want to maintain the competitive edge, and build up our inventory of manufacturing and new technologies, we better have the money to do it. Because
Yeah.
not only does oil and gas pay for our standard living, it also happens to be a major reason why we're able to do many other things in terms of becoming a middle player on the manufacturing front.
Yeah, really interesting stuff, Dan. And we haven't really gone into politics on this podcast before, and Jason and I have had real discussions about this kind of a thing. But I have to ask you, because it's a part of your life. Your 18 years as a member of parliament, that's a very distinguished role, irrespective of the party. And yet today, after 18 years as a staunch liberal, you're out working on behalf of the PCs. And I'm curious what brings you there and why. And I'm not trying to be biased on this podcast at all. I'm really curious to know why somebody would do that.
Well, it's because my party ceased to exist in 2015, 2014. The Liberal Party that I knew, that I worked for over 40 years, upped and left, and became more interested in politics of the extreme left. And that's probably a result of what we saw in 2011, when the Liberal Party, including myself, went down into defeat by the NDP. And so it was felt that the Liberal Party had to make a big switch to the far left. And doing so, it abandoned its principal roots, and those principles included but weren't limited to policies that sought consensus on a number of issues, that saw the middle ground, that tried to work to balance the priorities of the country in a diverse nation like ours, in which Canadians, whether they're from one region of the country, whether they're from one particular background, one part of the world or another, all have something in common. And we always saw that as the Liberal Party, as sort of the way of the middle road. What instead we got, though, since the Justin Trudeau era, has been a party that has perched from the far left, in which some of its major advocates, policymakers, are avowed socialists. I go back to the 1970s when I worked with, people like Jack Pickersgill, or if Lester B. Pearson, who took a very different approach to how, they saw the Liberal Party. A lot of the people who are members of the Liberal Party do not have deep roots in understanding it. Therefore, the flavor of the day, the newest idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and suddenly this desire to cling to things that were very foreign to our party left guys like me way out in the lurch. Now I'm showing a lot of pictures because this is old Dan McTeague in 1981. I read the Justice Building, the House of Commons. So no, I go back a long time to this party, and it became an affront to me to see the party so easily manipulated and led in a very different direction, in which consensus building, pragmatism was no longer the rule of the day. Why the Conservative Party? It's the closest thing left to a party at the center. Some would suggest the right. I would suggest on occasion, and maybe the left, depending if it's a social or economic issue. It is very similar, although not the same, as the Liberal Party I represented, not just with Jean Chrétien, with Paul Martin, but for many years before that, with previous leaders going back to the days of Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1974, when I was licking stamps and putting up signs for a guy named Hugh Faulkner, who was the science minister in 1974.
Thank you for that. It's very, very fascinating to me. Your accessible energy company. Go ahead and say your website name.
Affordable energy.
Affordableenergy.ca. And Jason and I and all of us who are following the Your Gray Matters podcast, and thank you for subscribing, everybody. And please do if you haven't yet. We had a very distinguished Canadian on, Judge Harry Laforme, who was actually the very first First Nations person appointed as a judge. I'm not sure whether we will have posted that podcast yet or not by the time people see yours. Harry is a First Nations person, and he had strong comments to make about how we treat energy issues and First Nations lands. And I'm wondering if you could comment on our relationship from your point of view with our First Nations communities and our natural resources.
Well, I think it's certainly been enlightening to see the public interest in this because it's been going on for some time. There was a point in our history where these things were not taken into consideration, but over time that has evolved and has evolved, I think, to try to benefit not only those who are proposing projects, but by developing Canada's resources, but to actually find partnership, not as a means of saying, hey, we're going to pay you some kind of token amount, but actually have you as physical partners in some of these projects, which have met, with some resistance by certain Indigenous members, but I think many those Indigenous communities usurped by climate groups that see Canada as a soft target, willingness to sort of bend over backwards. And in case of our Indigenous peoples, many of them have lost out on great opportunities and have expressed so, not just with governments like in Alberta, but with the Canadian government saying, by holding up these resources, these natural gas pipelines or these oil projects, we lose out on our ability to not rely on the federal government and the former federal Department of Indian and Northern Affairs, but our ability to actually make decisions with the money, with the revenue, and with the prosperity that comes with it, and manage these things for generations to come. And it might go a long way in resolving what is a very, very difficult issue in Canada and its intertwined relationship with the First Nations. I was there in 1981. You saw the picture when just a couple of months before the picture was taken, we signed the Constitution Act of 1982, April of 82, to bring forth change in our Charter of Rights and the Constitution, as it were, to repatriate it. And those included a significant component of respect for our Native and First Nations. We saw that later on in the Charlottetown Accords when my old colleague in the House of Commons, Elijah Harper, said no in one particular legislature in Manitoba, and that the whole thing came crashing down because it did not receive the consent of our First Nations. And so I think we've come a long way. We have a long ways to go. But I think we got to be very careful not to usurp or use this for political reasons, or to have climate groups from Holland or other parts of the world, the United States, come in and get a couple band members at one council to really frustrate the potential for other reserves and bands across the country who would very much profit from natural gas ownership and infrastructure. So I'm not talking about a percentage here, and we're talking outright ownership. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in of itself, as a means of ensuring that they too can prosper directly from the bounty, which is the country.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's a great answer. Dan, I have to ask you, you really are a member of the Privy Council. For my own education and perhaps others, what is the Privy Council? What's the role? And have they commented on anything lately that we should know about?
Yeah, no, the Privy Council is just simply anybody who's brought into cabinet. You're given you swear allegiance to the Queen and oath to your office. In my case, it was for consular affairs, although I was parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. My special responsibility was to save lives of Canadians abroad, and Paul Martins thought that was important enough to make it cabinet level, and hence I got the job without the title, without the resources. I had to do a lot of this on my own. No big staff, no cars or anything like that. They did it on the cheap, but it really means that you're subject and you are given privy to information that is kept confidential, and information that is to be used as a means of ensuring that the government is accountable. Not only you're a parliamentarian, which you have the traditional rights representing the people, but being member of the Crown or being member of Cabinet. Privy Council also means you wear the side of the Crown as well, which is to say you are defending a particular portfolio. Now, fast forward to what we saw a couple of days ago, a release, which is very unusual, into the public of a document regarding Canada's future. A very interesting document, because it's the Privy Council office. It really manages the affairs of cabinet in Canada, not Parliament, but Cabinet, the decision makers of Cabinet ministers, and is really attached to PCO, PMO, are part of the same Prime Minister's office construct. And there's a lot of very, very smart people in that, and they do provide data and information and position papers on a bunch of things. The one that came out that caught everyone's attention, which I saw yesterday morning, long before it was in the media, was, and that's not because it was sent to me, but I picked up on it, was that there is a very grim future for Canada and a possibility of economic and social collapse as a result of a number of circumstances, all of which could converge to make Canada not such a great place to be by 2040. And so in 15 years from now, it's important for discussion because I think it sets the tone for, I think, where many Canadians are. Like it or not, things in this country are not good. They have gotten worse, and they have a likelihood of becoming even worse if we continue down the path of, say, bringing in tens of millions of Canadians who will have no work, no infrastructure, no place to go, that we do not address the housing shortage, that we do not deal with the inequality in terms of incomes, that we do not deal with the fact that our prosperity is quickly being eroded by the fact that we are simply chasing away business, whether it's manufacturing, competition from China and other places in the world, whether the high level of taxation is a disincentive to investment, and of course, getting rid of our number one generator of revenue and wealth in this country, the oil and gas sector, and it's under attack, it's under siege. The Liberals and the NDP, the Greens, and even the Bloc have attacked it viciously, while at the same time collecting $13 billion, $14 billion in equalization, which comes primarily from a strong oil and gas sector. And I'm not here to advocate for them. They don't like me, I don't like them, because I predict gas prices and they lose money every year by my doing it. But I have to recognize we're, like it or not, this is important for every Canadian, your bread is buttered by the oil and gas sector. And if you dump on it, you're actually dumping on your own prosperity and your ability to make ends meet. And that's what I think the report really focused on, is that Canada better make a choice quickly. And I don't mean a political choice, but a choice in terms of what it sees as important policies, because the direction we're taking right now, for a variety of reasons that have been around for about 10 years, are going to drive this economy and drive this country into oblivion and right into the ground.
Okay, well, thank you for that. It's so important. Dan, as we wrap up, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I really do believe that people are affected by the price of gas. Our country is affected by our energy policy. And I truly believe that we have to have great leadership and great minds like your own. And, in fairness to our great country, I may not agree with some of the political stances in different parties, but I have to say, from my point of view, Dan, we're lucky to have leaders, and every party has great leaders and loving Canadians. And the only thing I wonder about as I head into my 72nd year is, where the heck will we get leadership and develop young leaders to run our country and run this world in the future? And that's actually something that I think about every day, is leadership development. So, Dan, is there anything else you'd like to cover? We want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, hope and promise of prosperity. That's what we have to bequeath to the next generation. And the fact that we have failed to do that, or that we fail in doing that, I think is one of the main reasons the challenge of our generation. The gray matter guys, the boomers and the gray rinse folks like me have to sort of now really start to consider it's no longer about ourselves. We can give guidance, but we really have to put our shoulder towards standing up for the next generation. That means being less selfish and being more open to ideas that make this country tick, and the prosperity that goes with it, for the sake of the next generation.
Absolutely. Well, Dan McTeague, it has been an honor to have you on the Your Grey Matters podcast. We thank you so much for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have comments, questions, please write to us. Subscribe to our show on YouTube and various others, and Jason will help you with that. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next podcast from the Your Matters podcast. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. If you found it interesting and you liked it, give us a thumbs up. If you're ready to subscribe, click right here. And if you'd like to see another episode, click right here. Tell a friend. Send us comments. Thanks a lot.